Welcome to the Chronically Will podcast, where we have real conversations with community that need to be heard. On today's episode, I get to hear from Tsega. Tsega, with season 2, I'm taking a trip around the world, and you just told me that you're of Ethiopian background, and so I've recorded so far this year with people all over from Africa to India, UK, all about. So I'm glad that I'm able to take this voyage and this journey and stop with you, a person of Ethiopian descent, background, heritage, culture, and also taking a trip back up northeast to Boston. It's very similar to the area where I'm from. Um, could you please give us all a summary of who you are?
Sure. So again, Will, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Hi, everybody. So my name is Tsega, but everyone calls me Tsega. As Will mentioned, I'm here in the Boston area. A little bit about myself is I've been living with type 1 diabetes now for 25 years. To be honest, I really don't know a life without type 1 diabetes. But what's been kind of great to see this journey is I have been a patient, or I should say I've been living with this chronic condition in 2 different spaces. So when I was first diagnosed, I was actually here in Boston with my mother's family. I should maybe give a little bit of background. My father is Ethiopian and my mother is Black American from actually outside of Philadelphia. And I had come to the US after being raised in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, which is the capital. And just miraculously that summer, my mom decided she wanted me to be with her family. So we came here for about 2.5 weeks. And a week before we were supposed to go back home, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. It was actually the day of my birthday. I refused to eat my birthday cake, and everybody knew that was kind of off because when would I ever not want to have some ice cream and cake? So I had to extend my trip an extra 3 weeks, which wasn't what we had originally anticipated. But then I went back home. And it was really kind of interesting to kind of see all of the education and training that I had gained at the hospitals here in Boston, and then going back home to Addis, where kind of the way in which they treated the disease was really differently. The healthcare system infrastructure there was also really different. The resources were different. I went back to Ethiopia with like so many different gadgets. Really, it was just a Lantus pen, as opposed to a vial, and 2 different types of glucose meters. And, I kind of had to learn how to use these advancements in a low resource space, but then also really kind of gaining a lot of different ways to think about type 1 diabetes holistically, because some of the resources that we had in the late 90s in the US were not available in Addis. And that being said, I think that's really what has allowed me to kind of live my life moving forward. I've been able to kind of do with what I got and really rely on the different communities that are a part of me. I think what's been really interesting is as finally, when I thought I kind of got a hold of my type 1 diabetes, I gained another chronic illness. So I've actually been living with RA for a little under, or rheumatoid arthritis now, for a little under a year. So it's been just really interesting to kind of navigate the health system and, kind of just growing with the disease. I feel like I've said a lot, so I'm definitely...
You haven't said too much. You just truly gave basically elevator pitch of who you are. So I got a greater background, more bullets to put into these notes. So you were diagnosed, you said, on your birthday. How old were you then?
So I had just turned 9.
Just turned 9.
Yeah. So it was so funny because when we showed up at the hospital, or I should say it was a community health center, shout out to those, they were like, oh my God, this is such a great age for her to catch type 1 diabetes. And I was like, how do you say that to somebody? But, now that I've seen some people in the community, I do have some friends that are type 1 that, were diagnosed when they were 15. I have a old coworker who's now a really good friend of mine who was diagnosed when she was about, I think, 20 or 21.
Mhm.
I kind of look at it a little bit differently and I kind of get what the doctors were saying, but in that moment it was really insensitive.
Yeah, it is truly a great difference on when you are diagnosed. First, I must think about like your family dynamics, like because most people who are diagnosed post adolescent years, like they have to take on this full responsibility. I mean, even so, like I know myself, like a person of color, communities that I come from at a young age were typically placed or put in a role that we haven't chosen. Like
Mm-hmm.
I know many people by the time they were 6, 7 years old were fully independent with their diabetes, which you shouldn't have to be because there's so much of a burden mentally that at that age you truly can't cope or understand.
I mean, but that's I think the burden of having
Mhm.
type 1 diabetes, right? I mean, I was diagnosed at 9. I have very educated parents. I'm very blessed. My both of my parents are educators. So they tried their best. They tried their very best. My parents, they tried really hard to be as supportive as they could, to learn as much as they could, but they weren't the ones, living with the condition, right? Granted, they were parents of a child who was living with the condition, but I mean, within, I guess, like 4 or 5 years, I think by the time I was 14 or 15, like I was managing my own diabetes because I felt before that I was also managing like my parents' emotions as well as my own emotions, as well as kind of, navigating this landscape. So I think for me, and I don't know if you ever did this, but my doctors recommended like sleepaway camp. I was supposed to say stay away. They recommended like sleepaway camp as soon as I can remember. So about 6 or 7 months after I was diagnosed, I applied for this camp here in Western Mass, and I went there maybe for about 4 summers. And then I was like a counselor in training and then a counselor in their day camps here in the Boston area until I was done with high school. And I feel like that sense of community was really where I was learning how to navigate my diabetes more than what I would have been able to get from my parents. Granted, my family and my parents are really supportive. They understand the illness and they try to be there as much as they can, but I still feel like the burden and the work has always been on me, and it's been me finding other type 1 diabetes communities and connecting with them.
Yes, finding community truly does mean everything. I mean, it's almost identical to say you're a child growing up in middle school.
Mm.
Your peers are who know you best, truly. They're the ones who can feed off of your energy. Or your
Mhm.
parents will see things occurring, changes, whether they're hormonal, intellectual, physical, like different things, they will see them. But that from the physical is different than mental,
Yeah.
psychological, emotional. Um, you were able to tap into your community at such a young age where you knew like I had to keep this in my pocket, these friends, these groups along my journey. And
Mhm.
I've spoken to many people that have said like who were diagnosed at younger ages where they did go to camps, sleepaway camps and whatnot. They're like, I'm still in communication with some of those people. Um, I recently released the episode, maybe last month, a woman who's been living with type 1 diabetes for 50 plus years. And she's like, I was in camp with some girls in New York in the 70s. And even today, I keep in contact with a few of them. She was like, those are her
Yeah.
sisters for life. So, yeah, it's no blame or anything because we know our parents, they do everything they can for our well-being. Seriously. That's a part of the American dream, to see your child be better off than you were.
Mhm.
And that's a part of the dream, I'm sure, that your father instilled in you.
Mhm.
And not you were diagnosed again at 9 years old. I want to go back to this birthday because I'm going to tell you about my ninth birthday. My
Okay.
ninth birthday, I had a Bart Simpson cake. And I remember it so vividly. It was Bart Simpson on a red skateboard. And
Okay.
when you tell me about your ninth birthday and having to go in the hospital shortly after and being diagnosed, it's like my ninth birthday, all I remember is like this peace, love, joy, happiness. But you had this traumatic experience occur at 9 years old. Do you recall much of that?
Oh my God. Yeah, I do. I mean, I remember, I think I remember every single like week and day leading up to my birthday. And it's so funny because, I make a big deal about birthdays now for two reasons. One, I feel like a lot of my friends who had birthdays during the academic year, they got to have celebrations at school, they got to have celebrations at their house, right? Like their birthdays were always celebrated. But for me, my birthday is in August, so it's in the summer. So there's not really that many people that are around because everyone goes away for the summer, right? So I always remembered my birthdays before my ninth birthday being very family oriented, which wasn't a problem. But then for that one summer to not really have those cousins that I'm used to having and spending my birthday with, and granted, I was with family still here in the US, but it wasn't like I was used to then go through something. And it was just my mom and I at that moment, right? Because it was like maybe a Thursday or Wednesday. It was some day in the middle of the week. It wasn't a weekend. So like people really couldn't like take time off to come, hold my hand while we were in the ER. Also, you're in the ER. You can't really have like five people in there with
Right.
you, right? So I just remember that moment. And like I told you, like the day of my birthday, I didn't eat, right? Like they put pizza in my face, they gave me Coke, they gave me ice cream, cake. Like I refused to eat anything. And then I remember we went from this like community center here in Boston, and then we were going to like the major children's hospital. And I remember the guy's like, oh, because it's your birthday, let me make it a little bit special for you. So like there was no traffic at all, but the guy still turned on the sirens for me so that it sounded like a little festive. Um, and then when I got to the hospital and, they finally gave me like all of the insulin that I needed and my body started reacting, I just remember being so hungry. And I was like, I will eat anything and everything right now. Right. And I got this like very like generic, like tasteless, like no spice whatsoever, like meal. But I was still so grateful that I was finally hungry because I hadn't been hungry for so long. I hadn't been able to hold any food down for so long. And here I was finally being able to eat and even though it was tasteless, enjoy it, right? And because of that, just like, I don't know, maybe 36 hours of just pure agony and then finally having like some really great relief. Like I make a big deal about my birthdays now. If you know any of my friends, they'll tell you I have a birthday month. And all of August for me, I celebrate, right? And I do that because I'm just so grateful that I can still kind of see the goodness in August 16th and August 17th, right? Because that's like the time I went into the hospital and everything got settled. So like I still see those 2 days in the middle of the month as maybe a sense of like birth and rebirth, right? Um, and it also kind of reminds me that I've made another year where I've been able to survive. And actually, I'm going to take that back. I'm not surviving. I'm thriving,
I
right?
was about to
So
say you're living.
I'm living, right? And
Yeah.
I think I'm really grateful because if this was like 50 years ago and if my dad like hadn't come to the US and this was another one of his family members, like who knows whether that person would have made it to 25, whether that person would have made it to 35, right? So I can't take that for granted. So yeah, the day is a little sad, or it was sad and it was traumatic in 1999, but today it's not. And, I kind of like to have that attitude when I'm thinking about it.
Right. So when you were just telling me that about how you didn't want to eat anything, and then
Mm-hmm.
once you got insulin, your body was like craving everything. It didn't matter what the taste was. You needed to
Yeah.
eat. Um,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people don't know about the forgotten hormone, amylin.
Mm-hmm.
Amylin is That's what they call it, the forgotten hormone. And it wasn't truly discovered until the late 80s. So people with type 1 diabetes, when your pancreatic islet beta cells stop functioning, not only do you lose the hormone of insulin, you lose the hormone that's amylin. Amylin carbs cravings, like for food. So when you were diagnosed, you were like, I'm not hungry. But as soon as you got that insulin, which is that other hormone that goes hand in hand with amylin, you were like, I'm hungry now. Like the receptacles in your brain were like working hand in hand. It was like, let's fix this child.
Yeah. They definitely hadn't felt that for like maybe 2 months.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned so you were diagnosed in Boston,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a big cultural difference, right? Um, Diagnosed in Boston, you got a Lantus pen. You go to Ethiopia, that Lantus pen was like technology,
Oh, yeah.
like the
I mean,
greatest new gadget. Because I've recorded with people from Kenya to Uganda, they don't have those pens even today. They say they're 30 years behind.
yeah, I can't speak to what it's like today because I mean, I haven't lived there now. June will be 20 years, but I go back and I visit frequently. And what I will say is, I have been a pumper since 2008. So a majority of my life as a diabetic,
Mhm.
or as a person living with diabetes, like I've been hooked up to gadgets. And it's so funny because every time I go home and they see my CGM or they see my pump, they're just like, what is this? They're so confused. When I go to the airport, like I have to like explain what things are, right? So that difference to me, I'm like, okay, it makes sense, right? Because again, a lot of these
Mhm.
gadgets that I'm using, they always remind us like, it only works in the US, or not it only works, but like, if anything defaulty happens outside of the US, like that's on you type thing, right? So
Right. So it's a
I, I,
American privilege.
it's an American privilege and I get that. But then sometimes, like you said, I go back to like my first years where I remember like the Lantus pen was even like something that was a little bit new, right? I remember I went with two different types of glucose meters, right? Because they were like trying to see which one I could get test strips for in Ethiopia. And I had that, I had the pen, and then I might have had like a vial of, I don't remember what I was taking back in the day, but let's say some fast acting insulin. And I presented it to like the best or one of the only like specialists in the city. I think there were maybe 3 or 4 specialists. And at that time, I think Addis Ababa had like maybe 4 million, 5 million people, right? So it's a huge encatchment of people. And I'm all excited. I've learned my ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, and I present everything. And the lady looks at me and the lady's like, well, here in Addis, what happens is someone comes to the clinic every single day. They get a shot of some long acting insulin. And then, they just have to control it with diet and they have to exercise. And they come back the next day, they get an A1C, and that's how they like control their diabetes. It's like, who told you have to check your blood sugar 5 to 7 times a day? And I was just baffled.
Right.
And my mother, I told you she's American, so she's hearing all of this and she's like, no, like that's not what they said in Boston, right? So I'm very privileged, right? Because I have an American mother and I have an Ethiopian father. Let's be realistic. I have an American passport. And at that time, we also had Ethiopian residency cards. So my mom's like, I'm not going to take this BS. So for the first 3 years of me living with diabetes, I was coming back to Boston every 6 months to get supplies, to meet with my doctors, right? Like that costs money now when I think about it. And my parents and my mom would be the one who would come here with me, right? So my mom was putting her work on hold. Luckily, my parents at that time, they were contractors. So my mom was purposefully taking 4 to 5 month contracts so that we could then come back to the States for 2 weeks to take care of my health stuff and then come back to Ethiopia. Average person can't do that. You know what I mean?
Not at all.
Not at all, right? So the fact that my mom was like, my daughter's health is of more importance to me. I now in my 20s and my 30s, I actually started to understand that sacrifice that my parents took, right? Because easily my mom could have said, hey, your country's great, but it's not going to work for our child. And she could have told our dads, we're going to pack up our bags and move back to Boston, right? That's what my mom could have done. But instead, she had seen, at that point, I mean, we'd been living in Ethiopia for 5-6 years. So my mom had seen how much I had grown, how I had connected with his family, and my siblings weren't able to do that, right? So maybe I should preface by saying I have much older siblings. There's about an 8 to 14 year gap between me and my older siblings. And, my siblings are very aware of our Ethiopian heritage and they know our family members. But my father's family, I'm so attached to them. I'm so I don't want to say they're a part of me because everyone's a part of me, but I'm very in tune with that side of our family because I was raised in
You're their baby.
I'm their baby. So my mom knew that and she made a sacrifice, right? So I'm so grateful for that because the average person in Ethiopia can't do that, right? And I think that's also what stemmed a lot of the community engagement work that my mom and I started doing, in my early stages of living with type 1 diabetes, right? So I think there was a walk, and I keep forgetting whether it was early or whether it was late or whether it had been on pause, and we brought something, we got engaged in it, and for the 2-3 years that I was in Ethiopia before we moved back to Boston, or before I moved back to Boston, we would really get engaged. And then my parents worked for non-governmental organizations in Ethiopia. So they would get them involved. So we were getting money, we were getting medication donated. There was just a lot that we were trying to do. But I think for me, what always frustrated me about those good deeds was that they were one-off, right? They never really had any type of sustainability. But that's kind of the work that I do in my day-to-day job now is I think about ways that you can come up with solutions that are sustainable and that don't really only rely on someone's donation or someone's, contribution in that moment, that they can kind of not be a business, but they can be things that keep themselves going. But I think that stemmed again from those experiences that I had growing up in a low resource space and then trying to make do with what you got, right?
Right. You just gave me a great summary on traveling with diabetes, because when I truly hear stories about people when they travel with diabetes and the fears and this is just interstate fears, I'm traveling from Philadelphia to Los Angeles and I don't know how TSA is going to respond or react. And do I got to go through the machines, and do I have to do a full body search and those types of things? But you grew up traveling with diabetes, not I'm going to take a vacation type of travel. I'm going to go live abroad in a
Yeah.
culture that is truly nothing like what I'm used to, whether it was traveling from Ethiopia to Boston or Boston to Ethiopia. Both of them are, I would consider, your homes.
Yeah.
But just the ins and outs of care, you having to keep your insulin cool, making sure you had enough supplies. And then I must give flowers to your parents, because that sacrifice again, like you mentioned, how your mom would just, she, mom, you weren't giving up anything. You had your baby. You had your baby with you, and you were protecting her. You you did everything to make sure that you normalized for her what living with diabetes was. That's why, like when you said that in Ethiopia, y'all were she was like doing different things. I was just like, she's just creating a pathway.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I shouldn't have said, she gave up, but I'm just saying like um, like you said, she created a pathway. She just readjusted things, right? Like she did a reassessment, did a needs assessment and
Mhm.
reassessed what needed to be done. But to go back to the traveling part, I will say I know TSA hates to see me. Like I am their least favorite person because, for me, I travel a lot. My old job definitely did not like this about me, but hey, I work from home. So as long as I get the work done, don't blame me. But I am in a plane maybe every 4 to 6 weeks. It would be a lot more if I could, but I actually have like a little tote bag that allows me to keep my insulin cool. It allows me to take like, 2 weeks worth of supplies, like fits perfectly. It's a little like, and it's clear, right? So like you can see
Right.
in. And, sometimes people will see it and they're like, you have a third bag. I'm like, so what? I've been doing this now for 25 years. I remember
Mhm.
when I first started traveling, because I told you I was going back and forth, right? So my carry-on was always full of insulin, full of supplies. And then I would have, my clothes and stuff like in the suitcase that got checked, right? So like that is how I have been traveling. For me, I never really have, clothes in my carry-on. It's always been my supplies. So now that, all of these new airlines are charging for check bags and they're charging for, your carry-on as well, and I have to fit everything into one bag, I get really mad. I'm like, I can't do that. So that's why I have that little clear bag. And like if anybody tries to like push back on me, I'm like, nope. Again, with like my sensors and whatnot and the pump, like I'm really adamant about that not going through any x-rays. I don't go through the x-rays. Like I've always am opting in to get like a pat down. Um, Shout out to TSA PreCheck. That has been the best thing I think ever for people like me or like us, like diabetics. Cause again, we've already gone through the background check. We really just, like I said, need them to pat us down and then we go through it. Um, but if you got to get from point A to point B, you got to do what you got to do.
Well, some people have their favorite TSA agents, and some people have their favorite people that come through the lines. Like, I'm not saying where you fit on that scope with them, but you're prepared for yourself, prepared for
I
life.
am.
I was just thinking, like, with you traveling, have you done any international travel where, like, is it the same with the carry on or with your
Oh
children?
yeah. I mean, so I have now traveled to about 4 countries in Africa. I was just in Panama and Colombia back in August. I went for like my birthday. I think it's all synonymous. I think as long as like you educate, like, once I get in line, I just like say what it is. Like I don't really have any issues. Um, I will say, I think for me, when I first started traveling like on my own and going to places where there were like hikes and like a lot of activities, I was really excited to start doing that. But now as I've gotten older and I've noticed that, as you get older, the way in which you care for your diabetes changes as well because, everything is hormonal. I've noticed that if I'm going to go on a hike, I want it to be in the US, not really maybe like somewhere else internationally, just because I get a little nervous and I don't know what the healthcare systems would look like in a country that I've never been to before, whereas I at least know the devil here in the US. So I know how to like navigate that if anything happens.
Right. Do you have any fears of traveling internationally as a person with diabetes? Because I mean, you learned Ethiopia, you learned the US, and you just said you've been to what was that, four countries in Africa,
Hmm.
and everywhere is different. Um, have you had any, not only fears, but have you had any incidents where you felt like you may be unsafe living or being there as a person with type 1 diabetes?
When I'm traveling or like when I go to another country, no. Um, but also I will admit this is a bad habit that I do, but when I go somewhere that I'm unfamiliar with, I will like decrease my basal rate or how much insulin I'm taking. So that I kind of stay at a little bit of like a higher. So like I'll stay in like the mid 200s as opposed to like going down into like the 150, 180 that I'm supposed to be at.
Mhm.
Um, and I do that just because I think I don't have a fear of traveling, but I have a fear of lows. They're always there. Um, so I want to avoid any type of low when I'm out somewhere else.
Yeah, I only ask that because I know that again, people fear the unknowns.
Hmm.
And specifically right now, like with the traveling, people fear um just not being able to access the things that they need. And you are giving people, the community, a different perspective, one that shows that I've been traveling my entire life. Look at me.
Yeah.
Do you hear how impassioned I am about traveling, venturing out, celebrating all of these things, and I'm doing them unapologetically as a person with type 1 diabetes. And
Yeah.
community needs to hear that. They need to see you so that they too can just garner some of that. Like
Hmm.
you have this free spirit about you. You do. You truly do. Like, ah, I'm celebrating two birthdays. Like,
I do.
and yeah, you celebrating your second chance at life.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
that is true.
we should all celebrate that. Like, biggest congrats on that. 25 years. That's a quarter of a century. Come on now, you're making it happen.
Jesus. Now that you say it like that,
Does it make you feel old?
a little bit.
I hope it makes you feel bold.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I will
yeah.
try. But every time I say that, every time I say, when you say quarter of a century, that's where it really hits me. I'm like, oh God, I'm not a child no more. Though I might act like one.
Look, and nothing's wrong with that. Have fun, enjoy life as much as you can forever. I wanted to speak a little bit more about Ethiopian culture. I mean, we know
Right.
like every country has different cultures, different heritage. Is
Hmm.
but just overall, because you spent half the year there, growing up, how was that for you with diabetes? First and second, did you meet other young people with diabetes in Ethiopia?
Yeah. So I think when I was growing up, what I noticed was, I feel like I was always kind of talking about my diabetes when I was here in the States because the way in which my like parents fostered it or made things like work when we were here is I was going to a lot of camps. I was going to like support groups with other, you know, kids my age that had type 1 diabetes or were living with the condition, right? So I feel like I was always talking about it here. But then when we went home, you know, my dad quickly noticed that like when we bring it up with family or when we bring it up with like family friends, like automatically they would pity me. They'd be like, oh my God, so sad. Like, how are you going to live? What type of life are you going to have? And my dad really hated that pity or that automatic, like, I know people were trying to like sympathize with me and be really empathetic and kind of try and relate, but it was very negative. So my dad noticed that. So like off that, he was like, just don't tell people, like hush, hush. And I always had an issue with that because for me, I felt like it was, if you treated the condition like it's something taboo, then it's bad and it's negative. And I didn't like that light. Um, but now I just see my dad was like trying to protect me in a way, right? Um, I mean, still to this day within our community, I don't feel like it's talked about a lot. I didn't meet that many like Ethiopian diabetics until I started doing those like walks that I told you I did earlier, right? So we had done two like national diabetes walks in November, like when I was a teenager. And I saw a lot of people then, but I don't ever remember like having any follow up with them. But then I moved to the US in like 2005, and I found out through just talking about it over time that like my dad had three friends who had children with type 1 diabetes. I started again to talk about it a little bit more, and I noticed that like they're not like we exist, we just don't really talk about it a lot. And I tried to talk about it and I tried to like connect with them and like create a sense of community, but like I thought it was 50-50. And if there's anything I've noticed about communities is you can't really force them. Like someone either wants to be a part of it or they don't, right? So for the ones that wanted to talk about it, and again, I feel like the first couple of times you meet another diabetic, you're really like commiserating and you're poking like who has it worse or like what sucks about it. But after that, we did start having like meaningful connections and meaningful conversations. But again, I think what I really like about my life or like the community that I have created is it is very diverse. Like there's people from so many walks of life. There's people that, developed the condition like at different stages in their lives. And I think that's what's been really helpful for me. But yeah, but I guess to go back to the Ethiopia side, I still do have some people that are actually living in Addis right now with the condition, and it's really nice to kind of have conversations with them as well and lean on one another.
Yeah, because I was wondering, because you were diagnosed at such a young age, if like family, culturally, community, if there was like a pity versus disbelief. You mentioned the pity because I know I've spoken again with people all around the world, and they usually come hand in hand. Like some people are like, "Oh, this
Yeah.
baby, how are you going to do this? Basically, we got to wrap you up in bubble wrap and stuff like that." And then there's this disbelief, like, "Oh, she's a child. She'll grow. Like once she reaches a certain age, diabetes will be gone." And that's the whole disbelief, but it's also a hope. But people truly don't understand what this chronic health condition is. There's so much miseducation,
There's so much
non-education.
education.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so weird because 25 years, that's a really long time. I mean, I like I said, I don't know a life without type 1 diabetes. And, both sides of my family, whether it's my Black American family or whether it's my Ethiopian family, like there, I don't know if it's a little bit of disbelief, but I definitely think it's a lot of like miseducation and not really knowing what type 1 diabetes is, right? I think on both sides of my family, it's like, but no one else in our family has diabetes. Well, yeah, we've now concluded that type 1 diabetes really isn't hereditary, but autoimmune diseases are hereditary, right? And if I look at both of my sides of the family, like there are other autoimmune diseases that have presented in other family members, right? So let's connect those two. No one ever wants to hear that. And I think the one that I always get really frustrated about is like when I go to visit family, and it's usually around holidays, so we're feasting, right? And there might be, I'm not a big dessert person, but sometimes I might crave cake, or sometimes I might want something sweet, or
Hold on,
I,
you're 25 years in. Don't tell me you still get you can't eat that,
oh yeah,
or you shouldn't eat that, because I wrote down here 95, 2005, 2025. No matter what year it is, it like there's still stigmas placed upon it.
I
Even people
mean,
living with
I
it.
was at my cousin's wedding, January 2024, a year ago, and I reached over to get like a piece of cake, and they were like, "Oh, can you eat that?" And I was like, "Don't you dare." I was like, I'm not in the mood. I can't do that. Like, I just, not today. Right. And I know they mean well. Right. Right. And it's so funny because one of my cousins, she lived with me when I was like a kid. And anytime like there was dessert, or anytime there were like cakes at like parties or anything, everybody was telling me, "Oh, you can have fruit," right? And they would give me fruit, or they would give me some type of like alternative. Really, with my pump, the carbs are the carbs, right? Like it doesn't matter. So, to this day, that cousin will always be like, "Do you want cake or do you want fruit?" Like she'll let me know that like there are options, to which I then have to tell her all carbs are the same. But then I stop arguing with her, because I'm like, you know what? She was only 5 years older than me, and like this was something engraved in her when she was a teenager. So like I can't take that out. But my other family members, I'm like, I need y'all to like calm down, because I can do whatever I want, right? Like I'm more aware now, and again, like I understand the ins and outs. But I think that speaks to a larger like theme within type 1 diabetes is, we are constantly learning. We are constantly learning our bodies. We're constantly learning the new technologies. We're constantly learning how this disease can, or condition, right, can be managed. Other people are not in that day to day, right? Because it's not their life. Like they don't have
Right.
to, right?
It's not.
It's not part of their, it's just not part of their story, but it's part of mine. So like I know they mean well, but that is the one thing that like gives me the biggest ick, is when you're like, "Should you be eating that?" I
Like
can eat what
I'm
I
a
want
big girl.
to.
I'm a big girl now. I'm not a little 9-year old. Like I've learned this. I've learned the nuances, the simple math and calculations.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you were saying that, I was thinking, because I have a cousin who's the same age as me. His sister was diagnosed when she was 12. She's 28 or 29 now. And a few months ago, I'm on the phone with him, and he's like, she's like, I keep telling her she shouldn't be eating this, or she shouldn't be eating that. That's why she's having stomach issues and whatnot. And I'm like, okay, I'm steady. I'm listening to him. And then he goes, I sent her this link about doing an all fruit diet, cleanse. And I told him, I said, whether she's eating cake, bread, or fruit, they all have carbohydrates in them. It's
Mhm.
about the carbohydrates. As long as she's given insulin for it, it's fine. And you know what's crazy right now, Sega?
What
He's
happened?
calling me right now. I'm looking at my phone and his name is calling.
His
That's
ears must be ringing.
that's crazy. That's crazy because I don't know why. Well, I know why many people do that. Media. The
Mhm.
media perpetuates diabetes as one thing, not this whole approach. It's sugar, it's
Sorry.
obesity. It's like, no, you were diagnosed at 9 years old. How could it be any of those things?
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I think ties in with that is, I still think to this day that we're all treating type 1 diabetes as if it's a monolith, as if it's the same. And it is not. I think what the conversation that needs to be happening now, and I think, spaces like this is where it can allow to happen, is there are so many intersections when, looking at type 1 diabetes, right? So, something I've now noticed in the last like 4 or 5 years is, how you treat your diabetes, how your diabetes kind of functions and fluctuates, really depends on the hormones in your body, right? So if you think about women, like something that I didn't notice until I was like off birth control and I was literally just like eating a little bit better was, my insulin resistance really mimics my cycle, right? And I think that's something that as women, we're starting to talk about how our cycle kind of affects our body more often. But that's not something that I was told 10, 15 years ago. I mean, it's wild. That's like a whole nother topic in and of itself, right? I think also like how I come and present myself in the world as a Black woman. I mean, all of the things that are going to affect me, like, let's be honest, like racism and sexism and all of those things are also going to affect how I'm able to fluctuate and manage my diabetes, right? Like all of these little nuances continuously affect us. And I don't think we're ever talking about that at all, right? But that's what someone with type 1 diabetes is constantly thinking about. I mean, the mental gymnastics that we have to do every single day just to live, like that affects each subgroup very differently. And I don't think we talk about that enough. I think we're aware of it subconsciously because there's no other way that we're going to survive, right? Because I think, as I told you earlier, like I developed RA back in February of last year. And, the way in which I see how I'm treating my RA and how I'm treating my diabetes, it's like night and day, right? Like I think maybe 2-3 months ago, I forgot to take my weekly shot and I ended up taking it 2 days later and I freaked out. I was like calling the clinic. I was like, oh my God, I forgot to take my shot. Da, 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 da. They're like, you'll be fine. Just next week, don't take it on Thursday, take it on Friday. And then the week after that, start taking it on Thursday again. You'll be good. Calm down. Have a chill pill. Well, they didn't tell me to have a chill pill. They were just like, calm down, right? Can you imagine if I missed a shot, like a shot of insulin?
Look, I was just thinking that. I was like,
can you imagine?
Yes, but for someone who has lived with type 1 diabetes for 20 plus years, you're like missing a shot? Like,
I was like, missing a shot? Like,
right.
And again, the fact that like I came in panicked, right? And no one in the clinic was alarmed, right? They were just like, it's fine. Like, you literally just got diagnosed. Like, you'll be okay. Like, you'll feel a little sucky, maybe, da 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 da. But they're like, you're good. I was like, if I ever missed a little bit of insulin, like, I would end up in the hospital with DKA. Like, that's what would have happened. So I think that's when I have to like remind myself that like diabetes is really hard. Like, it's really hard. And I do have to give myself grace and credit for doing what I have to do to thrive. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I was having I was in a conversation online yesterday where someone was talking about how they can't stop their blood sugar from continuously dropping. And someone had commented on it. They were like, well, just turn your basal off for 48 hours. And the comment section like blew up. Like, because me personally, I was like, if I turn my basal off for just 2 hours, my blood sugar is going to be rising 360, 400 straight up. Like, and I've noticed this because, I mean, we use insulin pumps today. Mm-hmm. So we know, like, if something malfunctions, a cannula, whatever, that happens. Like, we cannot go without it. And I was just like, I'm still like blown away by that person actually dropping in the comments and saying, just turn off your basal for 48 hours. You'll be okay. I'm like, what kind of lifestyle have you lived? Yeah. Like, not with modern insulin today. Maybe.
I mean, that's a funny thing, right?
Like, and regular. I don't know.
So it's funny that you say that, right? Because you're like, oh my God, like my body wouldn't do that. But I mean, I feel like there's like some days, and maybe it's like stress related. I don't know. But there are some days that no matter what I do, like I am so insulin sensitive. Mm-hmm. And it's just mind boggling, right? Like I could count my carbs correctly. I could, you know, eat a whole meal and say, I'm just going to like base it off of my basil and I'm just going to be dipping, right? And I mean, the thing is, God forbid I turn my basil off, right? Like 2 hours later, now I'm 300, right? So and that becomes really frustrating because you're like, I know if I kept like my basil on at the rate that it was at, like I would have ended up like in a coma or something, right? So, back and forth, talking to my doctor, who, again, I love my doctors, but they only have a limited amount of time. So they're always going to give you like cookie cutter frameworks to work with. I've noticed now that on some of those days when I just know I'm really, really sensitive, I have to put on a very low basil, right? So I think for tandem, they don't let us go below like zero point 0.1 units per hour, right?
Right.
But on those days, like that's the profile that I have to use. And I just have to be like really kind of like super aware of eating a lot. That sucks, right? Because you're like, I don't want to overeat. I want to eat when I'm hungry. I want to eat when I feel like eating. But then I think that's kind of like just one of the downsides of living with type 1 diabetes is you can't really see food only as like, I'm only going to eat when I'm hungry. I'm only going to eat when I feel like it. You actually have to look as food as like a fuel. So you're like, all right, I'm going to eat a really high protein. So for me, I'm extremely like not sensitive to insulin, like first thing in the morning, right? So like right now I had a banana. I had to give myself so much insulin for it, right? Still rising. But like I've noticed when I eat like really high protein diets, like then I'm fine. Fall in love with chia pudding, my favorite thing, right? So like kind of just being aware of that and just like knowing what you're doing, how you're doing it. Yes, does it add like extra time to my day? Yeah. Is it a tad bit stressful? Kind of. But guess what? I want to have a really productive day and I want to be able to live my life. So these are like the little things that I have to do. This is how I live my life, right? Like this is just like type 1 diabetes for me. Why would you think I would end up in program management as a career? I have no idea because, you'd think living this life, I'd want to do something completely different for a career, but nope.
Because you're so used to the ever-changing climate and cycle of living type 1 diabetes, to be a program manager means like it is almost like a cookie cut approach. But diabetes is the complete opposite of that.
Not at all.
Maybe it's because you've done this diabetes thing your like the entirety of your life, basically. Your brain was like, we gotta balance this out a little bit somehow, some way.
Maybe.
I mean, it could be many things.
Yeah.
Do you have any family history? Well, you did say you have family history of other autoimmune conditions. Do you have anyone else with type 1?
In my family, and I'm now like thinking about, cousins and yeah, no one has diabetes, which is extremely interesting. No one has type 2 diabetes either. And then my dad thinks that maybe one of his father's younger sisters might have had type 1 because when he thinks about kind of like some of the symptoms that she had before she eventually like passed, they think that's what it was. And again, I mean, this is like someone in the 50s or 60s. So, and my father, his family is from like a big city in the north, and in the 50s and 60s, it wasn't a big city. It was like a big town. So yeah, but I do wonder if that aunt who passed away and had symptoms of type 1 diabetes, according to my dad, I wonder what it would have been like if she had kids, right? Would they have had diabetes? What would that have looked like? But we'll never know.
We'll never know. And I mean, her being in Ethiopia as opposed to being in the US, where myself just 4 years ago, I was able to look through ancestry.com and find my great grandmother's death certificate, sorry, death certificate. And it reads right in front of my eyes, like, and when I read it, I'm like, wow, she passed. Well, it says she became sick January 19th, 1954, passed February 2nd, 1954, complained about
Um,
stomach issues. She had lost a ton of weight, was frail thin, like 80 plus pounds. And at the end it says that's due to acidosis.
oh, wow. Wild.
1954, like you just said, 1950s, 1960s, but that was here in the US. And she lived in a rural region outside
Mm.
of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. She had an indigenous background, and that's why she didn't have access to healthcare and stuff, even in the 1950s. Like
Yeah.
she was on a farm.
That opens up a whole new door, but I mean, I think I mean that's wild, right? Because like you said, like the 50s, 60s, two different places still had a very similar outcome, right? Again, I can't say for certain whether my aunt was type 1 diabetic or not, but it's wild because I do still think some of that access is still an issue to this day, right? So I'll give you a little bit of a story of why I think so. I mean, I've been on a pump my whole life. Like I have gotten off of the pump for
Mhm.
bouts of time because I'm like, I'm so sick of being a pumper. Please, 48 hours later, I'm turning that thing back on. I'm putting in another site, right? Um, but I had to switch insurances last year. And my whole life that I've been on pumps up until 2024, I have never had to pay a copay or anything like to get my diabetes supplies or my pump supplies, right? I've had to pay for the sensors. That's neither here nor there. I'm just talking about the pump. And this time I had to pay. And the amount that I had to pay for each like monthly supply that I was getting was a lot of money, particularly for someone who's paying a premium for the health insurance, right? And I just remember like going back and forth. They said, this is the plan that your company made, blah, 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 blah. Cool. So then a little bit of backstory, I get let go from my job in September. It shouldn't have been unexpected, but still felt unexpected. And then I had to get new insurance. And I had to fight for my new insurance to approve or even say, okay, we're going to cover your medical supplies. To which I then said, you still know there's no cure for diabetes, right?
Right.
This is common knowledge now. So if you're getting notes from a doctor, from a diabetes center saying that this girl has been on this pump now for 5 years, she's been on this regimen for 5 years, it's working. Why is there issues, right? And I'm a pretty smart girl. I had some free time, so I had to fight for this to be covered or to show that it needed to be covered. And I still to this day don't understand why we're creating that barrier to access. I still to this day don't understand why we're making that difficult. And then I still don't understand why, when a frustrated patient client comes to your door, the system itself is so broken that you don't even have any like compassion or you don't have any understanding. Like, I don't know, that vicious cycle just keeps getting worse and worse. And I would think the longer I've been going through this, it would be easier, but it's not. You know what I mean?
Look, Sega, when you just said that, like, I had all of these thoughts come to mind because first I was like, with technology and the advancements of it, the prices of things have gone down. Like when you think of
Right.
the first iPhone, computers, like computers are ever changing. and they're not
Mm-hmm.
getting more expensive. Like I remember my parents getting a computer back in like the late 90s, and it cost them a few thousand. That same
Yeah.
computer like today is like $100. An insulin pump. The price of it just keeps on rising when that is a necessity. It's not a research thing that we should have to go through. We shouldn't be having to fight it. Like we've already spoken about the different hormonal um, challenges and changes that we go through as living with type 1 diabetes. It's all day, meaning not 24/7, 365, 25/8, 366. That's living
Yep.
with type 1 diabetes. Why isn't there someone somewhere saying, how can we make life easier for them? Because if we're able to access these things, more money will acclimate. Like you're getting more funds, more people are able to access these things.
I don't even know like where to start because I feel like I'm just going to end up, that with like the Spider-Mans like pointing at each
Yep.
other. Like that's literally how this whole thing feels to me. But then also it just feels, I don't know, it because I know this is not a rare disease. Type 1 diabetes is not rare anymore, right? I think when I was first diagnosed, no, I don't even think it was rare when I was first diagnosed, right? Like, but I work in, or I've a lot, my last job was in the rare disease space, right? And I feel like, there's a lot of um, really positive like advocacy work that's done around rare diseases that I feel like if as diabetics we did a little bit more of that, maybe we would be heard. I don't know. Maybe this is just like wishful thinking. I know there's like the American Diabetes Association. I know there's like JDRF and all of those things, but I don't know. I, I, I don't know. I feel like I have some things, but I don't know if I want them to be recorded.
Look, there's a lot. Like even like I'm in these conversations in this space often. Yesterday, I was in a conversation space about matter of fact, no, that was early this morning, like early, like 7
Oh,
a.m.
wow.
And this conversation was about a cure. And
Mhm.
people and one person was like, what do you think is the issue? Why aren't people believing in the sciences that are showing that a cure could soon be a functional cure could be available? Because
Mm.
there are tons of people that have gone through the process and the clinical trials of getting these implanted islet beta cells. And now there's a new release that was released only yesterday from, I want to say, Sanofi Pharmaceuticals, where the pouch that holds the islet beta cells have been shown to not need immunosuppressants,
Wow.
anti-rejection meds. It's working. And they're like, why aren't people believing this stuff when it's shown? And I'm like, like my train of thought went to, well, we still don't have enough people signing up for these clinical trials.
Hmm.
Like that, like if we had more people signing up for them and we are able to see more people that are doing these things instead of the 4, 5 people who don't look like us, truly,
Yeah.
like that would matter. That would make a whole change, that would be a whole like
But that speaks on something else that
mhm.
I used to do work on. And it's like there's a huge distrust in the medical
No.
system, in the health system, right? There's a huge distrust in biotech. And again, it's really leans on racism, right? But what I will say is because I was just doing this work in the past around clinical trials for oncology products, right? And the whole issue is not enough Black Americans or Black people are in any of these databases. So then, you get these drugs, you give them, they work or they don't work, or the rate isn't like it is in the clinical trials, right? And then that becomes an issue and it becomes, an equity thing, right? Because now, you have these quote unquote therapeutics that are not working in a group because they were never in the clinical trial to begin with, right? And I think thinking about, diabetes as a cure or finding a cure for diabetes, and I don't know if we've found a cure yet. I think we've just found some durable therapies because I don't know. And again, these clinical trials haven't been that long, so we don't know the durability of it yet to say whether it's a cure or not. But what I will say is, diabetes is so different for all of us. People living with type 1 diabetes, yes, maybe it's 80% similar, but then it's 20% different. And those differences make or break like whether the drug is going to work, but it's so different, right? So I think now what I've noticed is because I kind of see what some of the companies are doing with their trials or with the product that's made it to the market, or I should say phase 3. And I think the people that have been a part of these trials, it's very homogenous, right? And I don't know how to convince somebody else to like sign up for a trial, but I've always been one to donate my blood. If there was a trial, I think when I first was in high school that I signed up for, didn't qualify for it, but I'm not like one of those people living with type 1 diabetes that was like, oh, it's part of my identity. Like I'm never going to get a cure. Da, 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 da. Let me know. I will sign up so quickly. Like it has taught me so much, but I am willing to let go because if there is anything I have noticed, I have no problem living a soft life. All right. I can get rid of this crippling anxiety.
Look, there's so many fears of living with diabetes. So many things that are misunderstood. It truly has and does continue to affect the different relationships we build, whether it's with loved ones, significant others, employment, community. It truly does. But I can sense here in this conversation that diabetes has not stopped you from becoming the person who you truly want to be. And I'm sure your parents look at you and they look at the 9-year-old and they're like, nothing has stopped her. They smile. They like it brings light and joy to their life. Like they know that they did everything they could for you to be confident and be at your best. So as we wind down, I must ask you this, Tsega, my friend. I did add in a title. I was like, I was jotting down things. I was like, this is like a flight from Boston to Ethiopia. So I have input that into the title of this episode for when it is released. But I must ask you this because it's like you put in these segues or segments that you knew where I was going to go to. So on the day, a true functional cure is available for all, not meaning just a small percentage or culture. It's available for all. Just like a lot of different remedies that exist today that weren't available 10, 20 years ago, but they're available to all and you can access them and you know that they work. You know that it's been proven. I've called you, say, diabetes is done. Like it's over with. Look at the community. Everyone's celebrating. On that day, Tsega, you find out that you have been fully cured. You don't have to bring on that tote. You don't have to go through the self scanning, like the scanning machines. You can just walk through like everybody else. You may miss your tote because you're used to it. You might be stuffing like some things in there that aren't diabetes related at times. But on that day, you find out that you've been cured of type 1 diabetes. What do you do?
What do I do?
What do you do?
Oh, man. I keep saying breathe. I don't know. I feel like I don't know what I'd do, but I have a feeling that I would feel so relieved and I feel so free and I mean, emotional. And I feel like I'm saying all of these things as if like type 1 diabetes has been chaining me and it hasn't, right? but I just think it's been like an additional chip that I have to be aware of. So to be able to put that down truly and fully and still be the phenomenal person that I am without the fluctuations, I think that's going to feel extremely freeing. And I think on that day when you give me that call, it's almost like an emotional, like, oh, what's that cloak in Harry Potter that makes everybody invisible?
I can't remember the name of it. If I have,
Well, whatever it is, like I feel like I would just like take that off and I'd fully be seen.
you'll be able to maximize your time.
Yeah, because type 1 diabetes just takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of time. So being able to get that back, I think I'd be grateful. And I say that as like I'm getting another notification that my blood sugar is like 200.
Look, and on
like no longer having those things like interrupting my being and my space and my Apple Watch. I think
you could just let your Apple Watch be an Apple Watch.
just let my Apple Watch be an Apple Watch.
And on that day, Tsega, I will call you. We will get out. We will breathe. I've been taking notes of everyone I've recorded with to see what they all want to do. And I told them we're going to make it happen.
All right.
On that day, a cure is here. This community will even embrace each other more. Truly. And Tsega, I truly thank you for joining me on the Chronically Well podcast, where we have real conversations with community that needs to be heard, because Tsega, you are truly someone that needs to be heard. Thank you.
Yeah. Appreciate it, Will.
Appreciate you.
All right.